Hey, Annie, guess what?
What?
We just launched a Business of Biotech newsletter.
Yeah?
Yeah, I know what you're thinking.
What am I thinking?
We don't need another newsletter.
Yeah, I might have been thinking that.
Annie, I swear on my grandpa's grave, you're going to like this newsletter.
That's a pretty bold swear, Matt.
Hear me out. It's monthly, only once a month. It's ad-free, and it's modeled after the Business of Biotech podcast. It's got the same insight from the builders of biotech that you see in the podcast. So what's not to like?
That actually sounds like it doesn't suck.
Pretty high praise, Annie. Check it out. bioprocessonline.com/BOB. Go there and sign up for this newsletter. You won't regret it. Nadim Ahmed signed on as president and CEO at Cullinan Oncology a little over a year ago. His first foray into clinical stage biotech after working his way through the ranks from clinical development at GSK to leadership of global hematology efforts at Celgene and Bristol Myers Squibb over the course of the last 29 years. In the months since Ahmed joined Cullinan, the company's expanded its clinical programs from 1 to 3, cemented its cash position in part by entering into a lucrative strategic collaboration with Taiho Pharmaceutical, doubled its workforce, and moved into a new headquarters in Cambridge. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's episode of the Business of Biotech, we're going to get to know Nadim. We're going to learn a little bit about the moves he's made at Cullinan and the moves that he plans to make under his watch. Nadim, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Matt. Thanks.
It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. And as I said, I want to learn a little bit about you before we get into some of the Cullinan discussion. I'm going to ask you to hit the rewind button and go way back. I don't want to date you. I don't want to say way back, but back a ways, right, to your formative education years. And when I look at that, I see that you hold you hold pharmacology and IT degrees. Now, again, don't want to date you, but when you earn these degrees, from my purview, you earn these degrees at a time when that combination wasn't as maybe prevalent, cool, or necessary as it is today, right? Like the combination of pharmacology and IT, I think in today's day and age is rare and super sought after. There's a lot of value in that combination. You earn those degrees. I don't know. Maybe you just have amazing foresight and some. 20 plus years ago, you thought, boy, if I combine these two, I'm going to be have a leg up, be ahead of the curve, right? Tell me about that though. When you were working through those degrees, was it intentional? I mean, was that combination an intentional one for you?
Yeah. So I always had an interest in both science and computing, actually. And did a bit of programming at home and stuff like that. And I guess I would say I had an instinct that both computing, data, and analytics in the future would perhaps be more involved in decision making. And so that kind of drew me in. Now, of course, I didn't know we'd come up with things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and all that stuff. But I did have an instinct that having both of those things would probably be advantageous for the future. So perhaps it was a bit more of an instinct combined with kind of my natural interests, I would say, as well. And funnily enough, my first role in the industry was in a role called clinical data management. So you see the clinical and the data again, right? And so that was my first role, and it used both my science and my computing background. And then from there, my career kind of started out in research and development with both clinical development and medical affairs. And then I transitioned more to the business side, working in global, US, and international commercial roles. And in terms of companies, I started out actually at Wellcome, which was Burroughs Wellcome in the US, which then became Lexa Wellcome. And then when it became GSK is when I actually came to the US. And then from there went to Celgene, to BMS, and then ultimately to Cullinan Oncology most recently.
Yeah, it's on paper I look at it, it's sort of a classic climb the ladder, right? Rise through the ranks story, starting out in R&D, clinical development, and working your way up into, as you said, business management, operations, and eventually into the C-suite. At what point, I'm just curious about, at what point on that on your career trajectory did it occur to you that perhaps you wanted to lead a company of your own, not just a team or a group or an effort within, a big pharma environment, but lean a therapeutic development effort all unto itself?
Sure. Yes. So I wasn't one of these people that had the burning ambition to be a CEO from day one on the job. And I always approached my work through looking at it through a lens of learning opportunities. I really love to learn. And I think as I progressed, I would often think, now what's my next learning opportunity, right? So for example, a big change for me was going from R&D to the business side. And I remember I was in clinical development at the time. And back then, at least, and to some degree still now, I wasn't a physician. And, to really progress in clinical development at that time, you really needed to be a physician. And so I thought about, okay, what's my next learning opportunity going to be? And I remember going to these project team meetings and seeing the business guys, and I thought, wow, that looks quite interesting. But I couldn't go straight from clinical development to marketing or the commercial side. So medical affairs ended up being my stepping stone, if you like, because you kind of get to work. It's more a medico marketing type role, or the way it was then in headquarters. And so that allowed me to kind of move more towards the business side of things. But it also made me a better business person to have that scientific and clinical background. And so I still have that innate curiosity around science and pipeline. And so as I moved to the commercial side, including within GSK and then to Celgene, and Celgene was a time of rapid growth. And I think as my career progressed there, I then started to think seriously about, okay, where can I take this? And again, within the context of learning on the job, doing US roles, international roles, global roles, at Celgene, it really afforded me the opportunity to take on a C-suite role and, I've always thought about where can I make an impact? And so I think that allowed me to make an impact heading up that business, which I really enjoyed. And I think, once I did that, I thought, I'm going to continue to look at these sorts of opportunities.
Yeah. And then the other big transition that I'm curious about, the transition from into the C-suite, but then there's a big transition when you go from the comfort and privilege. Privilege probably isn't the right word, but the comforts, we'll leave it at that, of big pharma to leading a clinical stage company like Cullinan. So what was the inspiration there to make that move? And how did you, I'm looking for a little bit more than inspiration. What were you worried about? Like what was the risk? How did you how'd that kind of play out in Nadim's head when the opportunity arose?
Sure. When it comes to my career, I've always been somewhat of a risk taker and tend to kind of just jump into the unknown. It's partly how I'm wired. And I think for me, it was, I reflected on my time at Celgene, and there it was a much smaller organization when I joined in 2010. And it was much more of I'd say a biotech culture, especially as a company experienced like really rapid growth during the decade or so that I was there. And I really enjoyed that kind of unique entrepreneurial culture, and also, building out the company. We were entering new countries, new launches, new markets, building new functions. And I think that really kind of whet my appetite to get into I would call it a more creative culture driven by that kind of, free spirit, seeking innovation, etc. And so, it really also helped to drive my thinking about my next career move after BMS. But it was probably those Celgene days that really gave me that exposure to much more of a biotech culture. So it wasn't a big move in terms of thinking what I wanted to do next and entering biotech space here at Cullinan Oncology. So that was part of my thinking. And interestingly, although most of my career has been in larger pharma, there are many aspects of biotech that actually resonate with me probably more. Things like, as I described, the entrepreneurial spirit, that creative culture that can really drive innovation, agility in decision making, speed of execution is a big one for me, and external rather than internal focus. And so, those were some of the things that were naturally occurring in the biotech space that really resonate with me. And so as I thought about the next opportunity, coming back to your original question, I wanted to be CEO of a biotech company, and Cullinan Oncology kind of met all the things that I was looking for in my next role, right? So things that were important for me were excellent science with a highly talented team, and Cullinan Oncology checked that mark for me. I wanted to go to a clinical stage company rather than much earlier, so that I could, use my skills and experiences. I really like the breadth and depth of a very diversified portfolio, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Highly differentiated molecules in each of those. There was a potential first or best in class in each of the programs when I did my own due diligence on the company. And then at the time, and even more importantly now, given current market conditions, I saw a robust cash runway and knew that I'd have the resources to be able to advance our pipeline. And so now, as I think my role as CEO of Cullinan Oncology, I'm also really, Matt, enjoying the opportunity of having full accountability from the early discovery phase all the way through to late stage development and regulatory approval, which is new to me, actually, going all the way further back and having responsibility. And another way I tend to describe it to my team is, turning molecules into medicine, by taking excellent science and then turning it into something that's going to be really meaningful for patients. And it was also an exciting opportunity to take a company from an R&D organization to becoming, our ambition of becoming a fully integrated commercial stage biotech company. So all of those things resonate with me, but I would say that early experience at Celgene and that growth phase really gave me exposure to that kind of nimble biotech culture that, that made it clear for me what my next move would be.
Yeah. All right. So you answered a good part of my question, but you didn't answer all of it. So you've told us you're the fearless risk taker. That's part and parcel with who you are. But what was, if any, that you're willing to admit, what apprehensions did you have? Where did you maybe feel less prepared?
Yeah, look, there's I think there's an aspect of, when you go from a very large organization, when you're leading an organization of thousands of people, right, to go to a very small company, you don't necessarily have the resources that you're used to, right? And you actually have to roll your sleeves up yourself, which has never scared me per se, but I knew it was going to be a very different experience. So there was that little bit of, the unknown. But honestly, I've always enjoyed jumping into the unknown, and so it wasn't a hard transition for me. In fact, the harder piece was convincing the board of Cullinan Oncology that I could go from a larger organization to a smaller organization, and they were fantastic about it. And I also think, again, that experience at Celgene, when we started out much smaller than where we ended up to, did give me that sort of exposure to that kind of fast pace, very quick moving environment.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. And regular listeners of the Business of Biotech will, pick up on the fact that I interview lots and lots of, big pharma execs who move into the leadership of small pharma. You just mentioned the board. That's an interesting take. We don't have time today, but I'd like to dig into, into that board mentality. I often think about, and have never really dug into, the employee mentality. Like when Nadim Ahmed is named president and CEO of Cullinan Oncology, and they say, "Who's this guy?" Oh, he was a big shot at BMS and GSK. What the culture, I guess, shift for them is. Oh boy, here we go. Here's this guy who's going to come in here and instill a whole bunch of big pharma policies and procedures in our little company. You've not been that. From what I've read, what I've seen you speak, I've read some of your stuff. You've not been that. You've been agile, and we'll get to some of the why behind that later. But one example of that that you've, I guess, nurtured at Cullinan is this modality agnostic approach there, which is, as I said, it's indicative of nimbleness and agility. Modality agnostic discovery process. Now, I've had several conversations with execs about, different modality agnostic approaches, tech enabled, some roll up your sleeve and try and, fail until you succeed approaches. There are a lot of different ways to go about that. I'm curious at Cullinan, what that entails. It's a big question. You're starting out with just this great big giant question. What does modality agnostic mean to you, and how do you go about that discovery process?
Yeah, so I would say our core is the modality agnostic targeted oncology approach. And as you think about, one way I think about it is the biology of cancer. So we know cancer is not a monolithic disease, right? It's over 100 different heterogeneous diseases with unique biology and treatment approaches. It's caused by, different genetic mutations in our cells. And so, complex processes that involve dysregulation of multiple pathways that cancer cells need to survive. And then cancer cells get really clever at, evading our immune system and surviving. And so the way we approach it is, our discovery scientists, they really focus on what are the high impact cancer targets potentially from a scientific perspective. Once we identify those targets, we then think about, okay, what's the best way to prosecute those targets? So in other words, we go target first and modality second, rather than the other way around. And so that makes sure that, we're not reliant on, a single platform or even a single product. And we also try to identify targets where we think they could work across different cancers or, so-called pan-cancer approach. But we're really led and driven, Matt, by the target first, and then the vehicle that gets you there. So target first, modality second. And it's a fairly simplistic approach, but it makes us quite differentiated in where we operate. And the result is our pipeline. If you look at our pipeline today, it's a range of biologics, small molecules. We've got fusion proteins, simple monoclonal antibodies, T-cell engagers, and so that's how that's our core strategy, is to take this approach that really focuses on the targets first. The other thing I think our team does very well is we define pretty high go, no-go hurdles pretty early on in the discovery process. Mm-hmm. So we front load as much scientific experimentation as possible as we can early into our programs, so that we make sure that we're only advancing the most promising programs into the clinic, as it were. And we do this what we call through the so-called thriller or killer experiments, right? So if you get the killer result, meaning you're hitting the no-go criteria, our guys are really good at just shutting everything down and moving on to the next thing. Since you asked my experience in larger organizations, I can tell you I've been at organizations where we think we've killed something, and 2 years later there's still a team working on it. Whereas my guys are really ruthless. And if we get the opposite result, the thriller result, then we double down our investment on there and say, look, how can we move quicker, get it to the clinic? What are the other experiments that we need to do? And so by advancing only the most promising assets into the clinic, we really have this focus on either first in class or best in class programs, which ultimately will help us to deliver on our mission to create new standards of care for patients with cancer.
Yeah. I want to dig a little bit deeper, rewind real quick to that discovery process. What is that machine, to the extent that you can describe it to us? What is that machine or approach look like? Because it occurs to me, especially, as you're modality agnostic, the process of discovery, discovering targets, discovering what modalities address those targets best across small molecules and mAbs and bi and tri-specific antibodies is going to be different, right? I'm assuming. I mean, you tell me, like, what is that sort of what is the mechanic of that earlier discovery phase?
Yeah, so we our scientists spend a lot of time thinking about, I guess, what we call innovation ideation, right? So, for example, searching the literature, using our network to say, okay, that looks interesting over there, and so does that. And then in the literature, I've seen this thing. What about if we combine all of those things together? They're just really good at doing that. And so we spend a lot of time in what you would call those sorts of thought experiments, innovation ideation, because, for example, we don't have wet labs. So all of the executional part of our discovery effort, we do that in an outsourced kind of way, so that our scientists are really freed up to really approach the business of discovery in a very, very strategic way. And so through that, they'll say, okay, these are the interesting targets. I'll give you an example. So we have a preclinical program called CLN617, which is an IL-2, IL-12 fusion protein. So we know IL-2 and IL-12 are cytokines that are very potent and have been very efficacious. The problem is when you deliver them systemically, they cause a lot of toxicity. And so they've not really been that successful in the clinic. Well, our team saw some science where there was one of those cytokines, and they said, well, what if we combine two very powerful cytokines, IL-2 and IL-12? They said, well, the thing is, you can't give that systemically because, you know, the toxicity is really bad. Well, what about if we delivered it directly to the tumor? Yeah, we can do that, but then what if it leaks out of the tumor? You're going to cause a systemic toxicity. Well, what if we found a way to keep it in the tumor? So this led to this whole process, and they worked with, you know, some really excellent researchers at MIT who had started thinking about this concept. And so then they took these two very potent cytokines, put them in a fusion protein with a collagen binding domain, which basically binds to collagen in the tumor and effectively keeps the cytokines in the tumor. So there were like several concepts there, but you know, they used their thinking to kind of put them all together and say, now how can we turn this into something that could really benefit patients? And so hopefully that program we're going to take into the clinic next year. And so really excited about it. But our whole pipeline is replete with those sorts of examples of identifying the target first, and then think of kind of innovative ways to pull a string of concepts together.
Concepts that range from physics to engineering to, you know, similar to the way I opened discussing, you know, your background in IT and science. But that's, so that leads to my next question, also kind of scrutinizing the modality agnostic approach at this emerging biopharma. If your modality agnostic approach results in a situation where you're pursuing the development of multiple modalities, which Cullinan is, you stress your requirements for, you know, IP talent. You know, it sounds to me like you outsource quite a bit, but in situations where you don't outsource, you stress your development, manufacturing, infrastructure, wet labs, that kind of thing. Even in the outsource capacity, you potentially stress your budget to outsource. You probably got to work with multiple outsourcers. You work with these multiple modalities. So I guess that all-encompassing infrastructure, as opposed to a few weeks ago, we had you know, the brothers Ian and Eugene Chan from AbPro on. That's all they do is build antibodies. You know, that's it, and they do a damn good job of it. So I say that's all they do. They're focused on it. I don't mean that's all they do. Like, you know, you guys are not that. So I'm just curious. I want to dig in a little bit into how Nadim rationalizes that and how you go about managing, you know, the nimbleness and agility required to pursue all these different opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, first, we have a very diverse pipeline of either potential first-in-class or best-in-class assets. So I think it's a very high-quality problem. So that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. First order problem for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, the one thing I would say, Matt, is although we are agnostic to modality, our core focus tends to be biologics and small molecules. And, you know, at this point, we're not pursuing complex modalities like cell and gene therapy, for example, like given the significant capital investment required, especially manufacturing. And, you know, cell therapy is an example. I know that really well. I did that 5 years before coming here, right? And so we are modality agnostic, but we're also very clear about what's off strategy for us. And so complex modalities today are off strategy for us. And so cell and gene therapy, you got, 2,000 companies working with version 1.0 of that, right? So for us to be competitive in that space would be very, very difficult. So our core tends to be small molecules and biologics. And so we're very clear about the areas we pursue. And then the way we operationalize it, I spoke about it a little bit before, we've intentionally built a research model that enables this approach. So it's about that right balance of outsourcing and in-house expertise. And so if I were trying to describe a very simplistic and broad brush approach, we tend to keep the in-house expertise as the strategic bit, and then the execution aspects of many things we kind of outsource. So that's why we don't have wet labs, for example, and then that allows our scientists to really focus on this kind of the strategic aspects of innovation and ideation. As I mentioned, we work with a broad network of global CROs for both research and late stage development, so that we can kind of execute our programs from inception all the way through late stage development. And in-house, we do have the requisite expertise in chemistry and biology, which then allows us to pursue that kind of modality agnostic space, but within the kind of parameters of that framework of, I'd say, more simpler modalities or mechanisms. And as I mentioned earlier, this does require intentional and informed approach to the discovery and development progress. And at the same time, I spoke about products and our scientific approach, but obviously talent, capabilities, and people are critical in this, right? You don't get, as I always say to my team, you don't get great results with mediocre people, right? And so we've been able to, I inherited great talent, and we're able to build upon that great talent. So we're not only looking at what we need now, but what do we need 2 to 3 years to kind of stay ahead in this space, and so that we can scale the organization as we go through the various inflection points in our journey as a young, hungry, lean, really bright workforce of employees.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. What are the, I guess, major benefits from a business perspective of taking this multimodal approach? I mean, some obvious ones come to mind, like you hear time and time again. We don't want a lot of shots on goal. We want to diversify. Should one modality not work, or fell out on a larger scale, we want to be able to have some options. Are there others? I mean, is there from an early to mid clinical stage, business standpoint, are there other advantages or benefits to the approach you guys take?
Yeah, I would say, look, I certainly agree with what you said about not being reliant on one specific platform or one target or even one asset. So it does mean we're not kind of placing our proverbial eggs in one basket, as it were, right? So that the platform fails, the whole thing fails. So that does give us a very diversified pipeline. It also gives us strategic optionality moving forward. It allows us to spread risk. Let me use the example of business development, for example. As we source innovation, our multimodal approach gives us a wider aperture of the full universe of opportunities that are out there. So we're then fishing in a very, very large pool because we're not focused on a specific subset of modality. So that's been very helpful as we've brought things into the company as well, in addition to complementing our internal efforts. And then as a result, we now have very broad and deep pipeline across hematology, across solid tumors, the range of modalities we just discussed, and also at various stages of development. And then also, partners look at that and say, okay, while, if it were a single platform, there may be only certain folk that are interested in certain things, but now you've got like this almost scientific deli menu, if I can describe it that way, of a range of different options and opportunities.
Yeah. What's been the key over the course of the past year since you joined? As I mentioned, you've taken the clinical program from 1 to 3 with more preclinical candidates behind that. What's been the key to that rapid acceleration? I mean, if you kind of nutshell it.
Yeah, so it's been, as you said, 1 program in the clinic when I joined, 3, and by this time next year, Matt, we're all going well. We'll have 5 programs in the clinic, which is just really amazing progress, and it's my team that's doing that. So again, when you have a group of really talented, bright, motivated individuals, it certainly makes my life easier. And I would say, look, within our leadership team, we're focused on 3 key areas. And so I'm a person who tends to really drive focus. And so that we're really focusing on those things that are going to move the needle for the company, as opposed to every possible thing we could work on, right? So, and the 3 areas are strategy, culture, and execution. And it's doing them simultaneously. And so, in terms of strategy, we've developed now, I would say, a multi-year vision of not just the areas we'll prioritize, but just as importantly, the things that we're not going to pursue, right? So we want to play in those places where we have a good chance of winning versus all the things we could do, right? So that's important. Strategy is about resource allocation also. And often you find strategy falls down when you aren't lining up the resource allocation with your chosen strategy. So we're very disciplined at that. So resource allocation, and then capability building too. As I mentioned to you, we've got things we do internally, and then we outsource some things. As you scale a company, then you need to start thinking about, okay, what are some of the internal capabilities that I now need to develop, and the muscle I need to build that perhaps I was outsourcing before. So we're really focused on what are the key capabilities we need to build internally to take our company to the next level. And we've done that over the past year, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And as I said, a lot of things do come back to people. We've been very fortunate to attract, really key talent in what started out at the beginning of the year as very, very tough labor market, in the sense that, people were getting 3, 4, 5 offers from different companies, right? And so we're very fortunate that we were able to execute really well there and draw in some really, really key talent. And then part of strategy is also your capital allocation, and where are you focusing your efforts on things that are going to move the needle. We spoke a little bit about this before. Being bold and taking calculated risks is really important as well, and with the knowledge that not all your bets are going to win. So I'll give you a very recent example of that. So one of our programs, CLN-619, is currently in the clinic, is one of the 3 that's currently in the clinic, and it's a monoclonal antibody that targets this very unique pathway called the MIC-A, MIC-B pathway. And essentially what it does is cancer cells find a way to hide from the immune system. With this antibody, we make the tumor cells visible again to the immune system, so that NK cells and subsets of T cells can come in and destroy those tumor cells. Well, this is a program that has the potential to work across a range of cancers, because the target MIC-A, MIC-B is expressed across a range of cancers, hematology, solid tumors. Now, it was one we insourced, but we only owned about 55% of it. So we have this really promising therapy. It's currently in the clinic in phase 1. We don't yet know if it's going to work or not, but as we kind of were doing, series of financing with our investment partners, I said to the team, look, on the one hand, we're saying this is really important, and on the other side, we own 55% of it. So there's opportunity, right, to deploy capital. And so, fortunate in discussions with the investors, essentially we bought them out, and we took our ownership from 55% now to over 90%. Essentially, we own the asset. Now, we don't know if it's going to work, but it was a risk worth taking for an important program. And so, that was a very recent example of kind of taking these bold risks. And that's part of, as I described, thinking about our strategy. In terms of culture, we've worked really hard on culture. And one of the things that's very important to me is empowering the organization and allowing people to fully unlock their potential, be the best of themselves when they come to the office or whether they're working remotely. And so early on we developed a culture committee with folk across the organization that were not C-suite people, so that we could kind of build this thing ground up. And that team within just a few short weeks kind of developed the values for our organization that you can now see on our website. They're driving the culture of the company. And so this is kind of like the really cool stuff that you really miss out if you leave it behind, or if you say no, I'm going to focus on strategy first, right? And so that was strategy, there was culture, and then on the execution side of things, you'll often hear my team talk about how I really urge this kind of sense of urgency, talking about speed of execution. And that's an area where I feel we can move faster than some of the larger organizations, because we don't have the bureaucracy, the layers and layers of process and decision making. And so my team really thinks about speed of execution. We spoke about one program in the clinic, that becomes 3 programs in the clinic, that becomes 5 programs in the clinic, and hopefully regulatory approvals after that. And so speed of execution is really, really important to us. Obviously, it has to be high quality, but that's been important to our team. And as I said before, it's a lean, hungry, motivated, and highly productive organization, Matt. There's very few companies that are able to bring 5 programs into the clinic with under 100 people. And so the work my team is doing is making a big difference.
At what point do you? So you just mentioned you have under 100 people now, which is double what it was a year ago, roughly, right?
Yeah.
At what point do you I guess anticipate dealing with the challenge of maintaining this limited bureaucracy management style as the company grows? So, I mean, you've doubled in workforce, you've moved to a new facility to accommodate that workforce, expanding the clinical programs. I made the joke earlier about, it would be cool to be a fly on the wall, in a scientist's office when they're, talking about this new Nadim Ahmed guy who's coming in to lead the company from Big Pharma. And you, rightfully so. I mean, you've proven that's, that you kind of turn that assumption on its ear with your management style. But at some point, there could be some risk in the nimble agility, hunger, limited bureaucracy approach as the company grows. What do you think about that? Do you grow concerned about it? Do you have a plan? I guess as you move down the line.
Yeah, look, I would say, so let me just say, in 2022, as you said, we doubled our workforce. So now we're just under 70 employees, but with a plan to continue growing as our pipeline advances. Obviously, we want to do that in a fiscally prudent way, and we will. So for me, the key thing is making sure you invest the right amount at the right time. So that you're not overbuilding too early, for example, right? We've all seen examples of an organization waking up one day and said, oh my gosh, where did all these people come from, right? That's not where I want to put my team and my people in, right? And so we try to be very smart about the right investment at the right time. Look, the other thing I would say is, as you grow as an organization, you do need to ensure that your organization and your processes are scalable. But I think we can do that in a lean way that continues to allow us to keep our, I'd say, innovative edge and entrepreneurial spirit, right? So it's kind of getting the balance, right? patients shouldn't be waiting for us to sort out our internal issues, right? They're waiting for the next treatment that we're going to deliver, hopefully, that's going to make a big impact.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'd say coming back to some of the earlier themes I mentioned, speed of execution is really important. And I think we do have an advantage there as a smaller company to be able to, move this speedboat much quicker than the larger oil tanker, if I can describe it in that way, right? So that's really important. And in that theme of process and bureaucracy, look, in all organizations, Matt, nobody wakes up and says, how can I make my company more bureaucratic today, right?
Yeah.
But it creeps up on you over time if you don't watch it. And so
it creeps up on you, sort of as a matter of necessity, right? I mean, as you grow, you can't let the leash go too long, right? So
exactly. And that's why we really focus on, I spoke about speed of execution. Rapid decision making is really important. So not introducing too many layers or too many committees that would prevent us from making decisions. But I tell some of my former colleagues who I still keep in touch with, my biggest issue is that when we decide on a topic, should we execute it today or tomorrow, and not the so many other committees that I need to go to, right? And so I think we're able to do that, but I do think the trick is making sure that, both your organization and your processes are scalable as you grow. So for me, it's a matter of just enough process, but not too much process that kind of, stifles innovation and the creative environment that our scientists and clinicians need to really bring forward great science and great medicines.
Yeah. Good deal. I want to switch gears here and talk a little bit about cash and cash management. You mentioned earlier on in the conversation that one of the criteria you were looking for when you pursued opportunities or investigated opportunities with emerging biotech was a strong cash position. And a year ago, a little more than a year ago, when you joined, that was probably easier to do than it is today.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right. 12 months later, find a company that's got a strong cash position. And now Cullinan finds itself in pretty solid footing, especially relative to an industry that's been suffering through restricted capital markets for the past 12 plus months. So give us some insight into that. What's I'm assuming that some of the seeds of that success were planted prior to your arrival, but you've added to and maintained that. And on the flip side of that, a strong cash position. I think $656 million in cash and investments as of Q2 of 2022. Good place to be, can also be a dangerous place to be. Good cash positions in large part, I don't want to get too philosophical, but are part of the reason that we're in the struggle that we're in now, right? Less discernment on the runway and burn rate. So let's take that in two parts. One, give me some insight into how Cullinan found itself in a strong cash position in an otherwise weak industry, environment right now for cash positions. And then two, what's your intention to manage that? To make sure that sure. things don't get a little bit too squirrely like they did for so many.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I would say, Matt, that a lot of this credit goes to my predecessor and his team, right? So especially our CFO, Jeff Trujillo. The company, again, before my time, as they thought about IPO and going public, they moved really quickly during pretty strong financing conditions and window in late 2020 to secure over $400 million through both crossover and IPO financing. And they really brought in high quality specialists and also long only investors. So they knew these were people going to stay with the company for a while, right? So that was important. So when I walked in through the door, it was around 400 million-ish or so. So that was number one, that was important. Secondly, for our lead compound zipalertinib, we did a deal with Taiho, which brought in another almost $300 million of non-dilutive capital at a time when things were continuing to starting to get tough. So that was really important for the company as well, and it was a great financial and strategic deal for us for various reasons. Taiho is a great partner. They specialize in, small molecule targeted oncology therapy. So this was firmly in their wheelhouse. But in addition to the upfront cash, we have $130 million payable on US regulatory approvals for frontline and second line exon 20 non-small cell lung cancers, which are kind of core indications for the brand. And then just as importantly, in the future, we get to participate in the upside commercial potential through this 50-50 profit share in the US, arguably the most important oncology market in the world, with a co-promotion option that allows us to kind of deliver on our ambition in the future of becoming a commercial stage biotech company. So it offers a very cost-effective and efficient way of building out an infrastructure in the future. So cash in hand when I came in, through work of the team, kind of built that position through our partnership with Taiho. And then to come to the second part of your question, right? This is making sure that we are smart about our cash runway and burn rate, right? So although,
sure, just responsibility, if you will, right?
Exactly. So, you mentioned over 650 million. Well, after Q3, that became just over 600 million, right? And so when you're in clinical stage, right, cash burns quickly. And so what we're doing is making sure that we're putting that cash to really good use, right? So the example I gave you was, the 619 program, where we upped our ownership for an in-house program, right? That we brought in-house from 54% to 90+%. Now, if that pops in the clinic, there's a lot of opportunity there, right? So that was cash well spent. We did the deal, as I mentioned, with Taiho, but we're also looking at, two other areas. One, how do we accelerate and expand our current pipeline and using the capital to do that? So for example, we're now able to do things more in parallel than sequentially. So, with the 619 program, again, which is in the clinic now in phase 1, we're exploring both monotherapy and combination therapy at the same time, which typically would have been more of a sequential process. So we can do that. We also are continuing to look at opportunities, in the external environments through business development. So if there's a right opportunity out there at the right price, we're open for business. It's got to be the right fit. We're not going to do, to your point, we're not going to do a deal just because we have cash. So we continue to think about what's the best way to deploy capital, but also make sure we have the cash runway to prosecute what we have currently. So we're very vigilant about that and continue to have that as a priority. But we don't want to bury our heads in the sand at the same time and not aggressively pursue things and accelerate things that we can deploy the capital to do.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The deal with Taiho is interesting to me, and I'd like to, maybe not necessarily dig too much deeper into the mechanics of that deal. You did a good job lining that up. But I know that Cullinan has, fully integrated commercial biopharma vision, right? Like that's the goal. And in the meantime, there's partnering opportunities. There will be opportunities to buy and sell assets. There will be, and I know that's part of that agility, right? Part of the nimbleness. What's your philosophy on that? Like, what's your, what's your mindset on between now and the day, whenever that may come, that Cullinan declares itself, a fully integrated commercial stage biotech company? Between now and that day, what are you willing to do and not willing to do in terms of the industry shuffle, right? Like the buy, sell, partner, collaborate, license, all those myriad combinations. What are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do?
Sure. Yeah. Look, first I would say all companies start from somewhere, right? They start from day zero, right? And some of the most successful biotech companies have gone through that process, right?
Yeah.
So
that's part of the, and I'm asking the question because I think about that, all those opportunities and the management of those as exciting and risky and scary and part of Nadim Ahmed's job. So I don't ask it in a way that's to say like, well, if you're going to be partnering and buying and selling assets, you're taking steps backward on your, vision to be fully integrated commercial stage. I'm just curious, like, I just want to learn. I just want to learn about like what your mindset is going into it.
Of course. Yeah. Look, I think for us, I spoke about our core values earlier on, right? Collaboration is one of our core values, both internally and externally, and it's key to our success. And then bringing that back to the pipeline, the way we review the strategic options for all of our assets on a case-by-case basis, and that's important to remember. So the fact that we did a transaction and partnered with zipalertinib is not a read-through to what we will do with the rest of our pipeline, right? It's a case-by-case basis. Specifically with zipalertinib, it just made sense that when we did the strategic and financial analysis, partnering ended up being the best opportunity for that specific asset. But if with the rest of our pipeline, there will certainly be assets where we will want to go it alone and take it all the way through ourselves, because we believe that that's the best way to drive value, most importantly for patients first, but then also for our shareholders. So that bit doesn't scare us. And part of my personal experience, I've been fortunate enough to have been able to launch a lot of products and take them over the regulatory finish line. So I have a good feeling of what that looks like. And so ultimately, our view is, for the right assets, the best way to drive value is to go it alone and do it yourself and become a fully integrated commercial stage biotech company. And that's what our ultimate ambition is. But we will look at, to your point, assets on a case-by-case basis. And there may be assets in the future where it does make sense to partner. But, our overall philosophy is the go it alone approach.
Yeah. And especially if those opportunities, potential opportunities to partner, can be rationalized as a stepping stone towards that greater vision. Right. I mean, of course, right?
Yeah. And look, we spoke about, the Taiho collaboration is a great example where we have a co-commercialization option in the US. So there you can imagine that, at that point in time, we could effectively and efficiently build a US commercial infrastructure that could be used to both commercialize zipalertinib, but also, other products in our pipeline. And it's a really efficient way to do it, right? A great strategic option for us in the future. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we're running short on time here. I'm grateful, by the way, for the time you've given me. And I know I'm pushing the limits. What have I not asked you? What did I gloss over that you think is important to the story that if I were a better interviewer, I would have asked you? Yeah, look, I think you are a good interviewer, Matt. We spoke a little bit about prior experiences, and I think part of my journey has taught me, what are the things that I've learned that I would want to continue moving forward and adapting, and then what are the things I've learned that perhaps I wouldn't want to continue moving forward and adapting, as I think about Cullinan Oncology specifically, right? So. I think the things that I would say are really, really important are, I call it professionalizing without becoming bureaucratic. And we spoke a little bit about that, right? And so that for me are things like, scalability. It's the discipline of using analytics and data to make well-informed decisions, versus kind of, winging it, as it were. And at the same time, you also want to make sure that you are still creating that environment that drives innovation, drives agility, the speed of execution to be able to do things. So for me, it's almost taking the best of my learnings that I've experienced to make sure that, we do apply discipline, rigor, professionalism to the scale up of the organization. But don't introduce so much, process and bureaucracy that it kind of stifles some of the great things that Cullinan had from day one before I arrived, as we kind of continue to move that forward. And it's far easier said than done. But, I'm having a fabulous time going through that journey with a great set of people and a leadership team at Cullinan Oncology. So I think that's been a great learning, and one that I can apply because I've had that experience in the past.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. I'll tell you, Nadim, I started kind of following you and paying attention to what you're doing on social, and the authenticity is clear. You can see when the authenticity is feigned or forced. It's not with you, Nadim. I genuinely appreciate it about you. So when you say those words, I take them at face value.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, and I wish you guys the best. I'd like to have you back on sometime not too far down the road to talk more specifically about some of your candidates and the clinical progress there as that clinical progress unfolds. But for now, I think this has been a valuable conversation, and I appreciate you sharing some of the insight into your new role there. Congratulations on that, your management style, and where you're taking the company.
I appreciate that, Matt. Look, 2022 was a fabulous year of progress for the company, and 2023 is going to be even bigger and better, and I'm just very fortunate to have a great team to work with.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to catch up on 2023 at some point. We'll give it a couple quarters, see how progress unfolds, and we'll get you back on the show.
Great, sounds great. Appreciate it, Matt. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nadim. So that's Cullinan Oncology President and CEO Nadim Ahmed. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online with the support of Cytiva, which demonstrates its support to new and emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like listening in on conversations with biopharma leaders like Nadim, subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast. Sign up for our newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. Also, be sure to leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. And as always, thanks for listening.